getting awfully quiet, so I think it's time to start. Let me take just a second first to thank all of you for coming out today on such short notice. Senator Gore's schedule did change and allowed him a few minutes to come by and be with us, and we're appreciative of each of you coming out on short notice. Senator Gore, thank you for honoring us with your visit today. We appreciate it very much. We want to welcome you to, and you know I'm prejudiced, but I'm going to say it anyway, the prettiest college campus in the state of Tennessee. And we are proud of our institution. We think this institution is on the move, and as I've already told you, last year we served over 25,000 people in our 11 county service area, and we're pleased with that. I think there are a number of reasons why an institution can be successful. Community support is one of those. An outstanding faculty is another. An outstanding student body is a third. And last, an outstanding faculty, administrative and classified staff. And my folks know me, Senator, I'm going to introduce them, not each one of them. But I want to introduce groups. After each group, ask that you just recognize these people for me. And I will start with the most important people at Motlow State Community College, that's our students. I'd like for our students to please stand. And you all join me in recognizing them. Senator, all 25,000 are not here. That's a representative group of those 25,000. Secondly, a group that is obviously extremely important in what we are about, and that's teaching and learning as our faculty. I'd like for our faculty to please stand. And next, Senator, I'd like for you to just see some of our administrative and classified staff who are here. Many of them are still working and still keeping the place operating. So, administrative and classified staff who are here, would you please stand for me? And then, Senator, I mentioned the good community support that we enjoy. And we do have some community leaders here. And I'd like to introduce them and ask that you hold your applause until I introduce those folks, and then join me in recognizing some of the few, but we have many community leaders who support us. And I'll start on the end down there. Wayne Stewart, would you stand, Wayne? And Wayne is superintendent of schools in metropolitan Gore County, the county senator in which we're located. Stay up, Wayne, please. Mrs. Fran Markham. Fran, would you stand, please? Fran is vice chairperson of the senator of the Motlow College Foundation, a group of individuals who help us bring in extra money that you can't get for us and the state can't get for us. She also, her second job, her first job is the foundation. Her second job is owner and chairman of the board of Microcraft, as you well know. Third, Lane Curley, Representative Lane Curley. Lane is our House of Representatives representative from District 47, Senator. And then next is Mr. Nelson Forster. Most folks in the room know Nelson. He, Senator, was the first chairperson of our foundation. I'll have to add that Mrs. Markham is a much better looking chairperson, vice chairperson than Mr. Forster. These are our community leaders who could make it today. Help me recognize them. Finally, Senator, another reason we think we're being so successful and doing well is you. And we appreciate the many things you do for education. There are three things specifically I think that you've done to help us, and we'd like to show our appreciation for that. The first is the Title III grant that we've talked about many times, the $1.6 million grant that we got, with two components for the ones of you who don't know. The first component was to help enhance our academic advising system. And the second component was to establish a computer integrated manufacturing center, which we have done. And this year I have 155 students in that computer integrated manufacturing center. As you know, we're in a high-tech area, and we thought that was extremely important, and we're pleased that we've gotten that, and your support there is much appreciated. Secondly, we appreciate your help in attempting to reduce some of the bureaucracy in the student federal financial aid program. And last year, in our small institution, Senator, we distributed about $1.8 million in student financial aid. This allowed a lot of these students sitting here today to be able to go to college, and we appreciate that. Third, I think is real important is the one that just passed recently on the Student Right to Know and Student Security Act, which I think is going to help a great deal for students looking at colleges and looking to see how safe those colleges are. There are many more things that Senator Gore has done for education. I appreciate what he has done, and I know you have. Help me welcome our United States Senator, Senator Albert Gore.
Thank you so much for your warm welcome, and Dr. Glass for your introduction. I'm most grateful to the distinguished guests who are present, Lane Curley, State Representative, and Wayne Stewart, Superintendent of Moore County Schools, my longtime friend, Fran Markham, who is a very successful businesswoman, in addition to devoting great efforts to helping Motlow State, Nelson Forrester, who is not only a friend of this institution and of mine, but also a family member of my state director here in Tennessee, and who gives us advice on a regular basis. Members of the faculty and students, based on those who stood, I'd say you have a remarkable student-teacher ratio here in Motlow State, and I am very grateful to all of you for your willingness to come out on fairly short notice and also on a beautiful day. Some people have decided they're in favor of the greenhouse effect, I think, after looking at the very warm and pleasant weather this fall. In your very generous introduction, Doctor, you mentioned the Computer Integrated Manufacturing Initiative and the high-tech corridor. And may I just build briefly on those remarks by saying that I see a very bright future for Motlow State as a key terminus of a high technology corridor, which will attract new jobs and new economic development as our economy moves increasingly toward high technology. As chairman of the NASA authorizing subcommittee in the United States Senate, I've worked very closely with the leadership of Huntsville and of NASA generally, and the business and civic leaders and educational leaders in this area to help facilitate the more rapid growth of this technology corridor. I believe in it. It is proving itself. It is going to work. It's going to grow. It's going to mean a great deal to this part of our state and this part of our country. It's impressive to me that Motlow State has been such an effective leader in helping to make this possible. Here on campus, you have a computer network, for example, which is far ahead of what many other institutions, far larger than this one, have yet been able to put in place. One of the initiatives I've worked on for the last 12 years, which has just now begun to near the construction stage, is a nationwide network of information superhighways. And those institutions, like Motlow State, which have prepared for the future, will be in an excellent position to take advantage of enormous flows of data, which will make the difference between our success or failure in the high-tech competition with Japan, a unified Europe, the emerging nations of the Pacific Rim, and others as we move into the next century. There are many other issues besides high technology and computers and networks that have been dominating the news of late, and I'm not going to try to cover them all because in the few short minutes we have together here, I want to save some time to respond to questions and comments as much as I possibly can. I would just briefly touch on a few of the highlights of the session of Congress just ended, the marathon session of Congress just ended, might I say. First of all, the budget battles have dominated the news, and I think the final result is far better than it would have been if the package of several weeks ago had been adopted. And of course now the news is once again dominated by the possibility of war in the Persian Gulf. I might say that I strongly support the decision by President Bush to deploy troops in Saudi Arabia. I know that with some, that decision was controversial. I know for a fact that it was a difficult, tough decision. But I believe it was the correct decision simply because some of the analogies to Hitler are indeed valid. Here is a dictator, Saddam Hussein, who has already used poison gas, not only against Iran, but against his own people. And I refer, of course, to the Kurdish minority, many thousands of whom were killed by poison gas 2 years ago. I spoke on the floor of the United States Senate on that occasion 2 years ago, calling for a decision by the administration to convene a special session of the United Nations Security Council to condemn that aggression, and said if the world did not put its foot down and serve notice that behavior such as that would not be tolerated, we might soon face another outrage from Saddam Hussein, and indeed we have. But now we are putting our foot down. And it's not a conflict between the United States and Iraq, but rather, as President Bush has said, a conflict between the world and Iraq. And I certainly hope and trust that if the rumors of war that have dominated the news in the last 48 hours indicate that there is to be combat before the end of this year, I certainly hope that it will not be just between the United States and Iraq, because the conflict is between the world and Iraq. I believe that the year 1990 will probably best be remembered, neither for the budget battle nor for the conflict with Iraq. I may be wrong about this, but I rather suspect that when the history is written, 1990 will be remembered most of all because it was the year when communism collapsed, when the idea we've struggled against for half a century suddenly was so discredited in the minds and hearts of men and women in the communist world itself that no one any longer takes communism seriously as a model for the future. A dramatic change of events, which has affected all of the other events that we've been seeing in the news. I'll close my remarks with a brief story, a true story, that illustrated the meaning and essence of this dramatic change in the struggle with communism. Earlier this year, a joint session of Congress was convened to hear a speech by the president of Czechoslovakia, a man named Václav Havel. Several of the leaders of formerly communist countries have now come to the United States, but this particular speech was remembered by many in the Congress as a particularly powerful one. But what I remember was what happened just before the speech. Didn't get a lot of publicity, but it involved a man and woman from Murfreesboro. They came to my office door just an hour before the speech by President Havel. President Havel had been in prison 8 months earlier, and now, of course, was leading his country. This man and woman came asking for tickets to hear the speech in person. They had driven all night long from Murfreesboro to Washington after seeing news of the speech on the 6 o'clock newscast on television. And he explained why he felt so strongly. He was a native of Czechoslovakia. He had escaped from Czechoslovakia 21 years ago by riding a motorcycle across the Austrian border so fast that the border guards didn't have enough time to lift their machine guns and kill him the way they killed so many who had attempted to escape communism for the last 45 years. He settled in Tennessee, married, and then last fall, 21 years later, He was watching his television set when the beginnings of this nonviolent revolution stirred his heart and caused him to turn to his wife and say, I want to go back to my hometown in Czechoslovakia and see if I can help. And so they went back, and they joined the nonviolent revolution and were present when the curtain of fear was lifted and the change took place. And the first thing that the townspeople did, he said, when the Russian tanks pulled back, was to go out and rebuild a monument to the American GIs who had died face down in the mud, liberating that part of Czechoslovakia from Adolf Hitler at the end of World War II. And within a half an hour, he said that everywhere they looked, they saw small American flags waving. And they couldn't understand how that could happen. It looked almost like a movie set. And then it hit him. He looked a little more closely at each one of those flags and realized that each one of them had 48 stars because they had kept them hidden under the beds and in the cellars for half a century until they could feel sufficiently free to celebrate what that flag and what the United States of America stands for in the world. We are a nation destined to keep and preserve and hold high values important to all humankind. And if we are to succeed in that long struggle in a rapidly changing world, we have to be true to our values and principles, and we have to also understand the primary importance of passing them on to future generations and also giving high-quality education to those who come after, so that that challenge of preserving democracy will be met by all who follow. Let me open it up for comments and questions and simply close my introductory remarks by thanking you for the chance to be here. Thank you very much. Now we have time for a few questions, and anyone who would like to kick it off, please feel free to speak right up. Yes.
Can you give us some sort of explanation as to why the groundbreaking of J6 at Arnold Center has been postponed?
Well, you'll have to get that from someone who is expert in the nature of the argument underway there. I'm not the authority on that particular controversy. I will say this. I worked very hard as a member of the Armed Services Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, to gain approval of the J6 facility. Some of you may remember that 2 weeks before we turned them around, I made a visit to the Arnold Center and became fully and completely briefed on all aspects of the J6. And the reason I did that is because as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I wanted to know every detail because I knew it was coming to the crunch. And so armed with a broader and deeper understanding of why this facility is absolutely crucial for the nation's future, I went back and did my best to give the officials making the decision some of what a doctor friend of mine called intraocular trauma. That's when you hit them right between the eyes to get their attention. And actually, it wasn't confrontational because the Air Force was convinced all along of why it was so important. The Office of Management and Budget needed a little extra convincing. And I worked long and hard on that matter and was very pleased when it came out successfully. I want to compliment my colleague, Senator Jim Sasser, and my colleague, Representative Jim Cooper, both of whom also worked very hard to gain approval of J6. And Although today was going to feature an official groundbreaking, it's fine to celebrate anyway, because this is a very positive sign of how this part of our state is moving forward. Yes?
Could you talk just a little bit about what the general feeling in Washington is about the reunification of Germany with respect to its being a galvanizing force in the EEC, and how, or what the general perception of how that's going to change the global balance of power?
Well, the reunification of Germany has been earned by 40 years of peaceful democracy and stunning economic success on the part of the Federal Republic of Germany. And it should not be seen, in my view, as the kind of event that has to stir fear that what happened twice before in this century will happen again. I don't believe that. I believe that their experience with democracy and free markets has fundamentally transformed the future of a unified Germany. I look at this conflict. I know I'm getting the signal that I'm running behind schedule now, and I regret that, but I thought that I was going to have 30 days from adjournment time to cover the state, and doing it in 7 days makes for a tight schedule. Let me just close on this story. First, let me say that I think the reunification of Germany will probably slow down the full integration of Europe by a couple of years, simply because there will be some apprehension, not of Germany's military strength, but of its economic strength on the part of some other members of the European Economic Community. That movement toward unification of Europe will continue, but it won't continue at quite the same pace during the balance of this decade. The Deutschmark is already on the rise in its influence in the world economy. For example, after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, in the past, a crisis of that kind would have sent the dollar up and the Deutschmark down. This time, the dollar went down and the Deutschmark went up. Another sign of how Germany's economic importance will continue to grow. But I started to say this, and I'll close with this. I had a hearing recently in Memphis on earthquakes, and they've been in the news of late, but this hearing featured a Russian scientist and an American scientist from San Francisco, both of whom agreed that what causes earthquakes is the movement of large tectonic plates in the crust of the earth. And when two of them press against one another, the pressure builds up below the surface. And then suddenly, the pressure is released when one plate moves decisively over the other, submerging it and sending out shock waves that knock down the buildings. I think history is made up not only of names, dates, and places, but also large ideas that move through history the way those plates move through the crust of the earth. And in Germany, in Europe, for the last 45 years, we have seen a large idea called democracy pressing against a large idea called communism along a fault line that runs right through Berlin. And even though the changes have not been visible on the surface, deep beneath the surface in the hearts and minds of those who lived in the communist world, some very profound shifts were taking place. The pressure built up. And then suddenly, within the last year, democracy moved swiftly over communism, submerging it, sending out shock waves that knocked down the Berlin Wall and that knocked down every political structure in Eastern Europe. The reunification of Germany became virtually inevitable when that tectonic shift of ideas took place. And now much is difficult to predict when you look at the future. But I do believe that Germany will play a constructive role in moving the world toward a new era. But the United States must lead the world. No other nation can do it. And we must rise to that challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the chance to visit with you today. I appreciate your courtesy, Dr. Glass, and I wish I did not have to race on to the next place where I am going, but I do, and I am delighted to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, before you leave, everyone who works here knows me. I don't miss an opportunity to give someone like Senator Gore some gifts from Motlow College. I'll carry these for you. But we have a Motlow Buck hat here for you, and a Motlow shirt that we expect you to wear on the floor as soon as you can. Here's a
jogging every morning.
good. We want you to wear that in Washington, D.C., Senator. Here's a collage of a print of the institution we'd like you to have. And Senator, this is our annual report that really goes into detail, telling people what a fine job we think we're doing. Thanks so much for coming, and thank all of you all for coming.